Okay, let's be honest. We have all found ourselves trying to draw something and ended up failing epically. As if all those long hours we spent practicing our skill just vanished into thin air. And most of the time, we just ignore it until the next time we have to draw that same thing, maybe using reference. But still, we leave defeated, settling for whatever shape blob looks close enough to what we wanted. Well, it's possible that we just need to practice more. So we buckle down with an overwhelming desire for improvement and spend hours trying to fix our mistakes, only to end up with a page full of, well, a mess. For some of us, our art struggles begin when we sit down to practice. Not all of us, but some of us. If you find that you're improving at art very slowly, or maybe even not at all, then it's possible you've been making the same mistake I've been making for years. And for years, we have all been told that practice makes perfect. As long as we do something long enough, we'll get good at it. And whilst this is true for the most part, just practice on its own can lead to a slow rate of improvement, which is why some people can draw for years and still not be at the level of those they look up to. Now, there are multiple definitions for the word practice, but the one I feel applies to most people trying to learn art is to do something repeatedly in order to become proficient at it. You see, the issue is that most people like myself just repeat what we think works for most of our early years and end up getting nowhere. It's like practicing algebra without learning any of the equations or rules. You may get answers that make sense to you, but are actually far from correct. There are reasons why people your age or younger are somehow leagues above you as far as artistic ability, and it's not because of talent or because they are fast learners. They had to put in a lot of work to get where they are, and it's not out of your reach if you push yourself in the right direction. Study. A verb. To devote time and attention towards acquiring knowledge on something. You see, this right here is what you need. It's that missing ingredient to that delicious art improvement pot pie you've been craving. Hear me out. I know it's obvious, but if you're not doing studies, then you should. And if you're doing studies, are you doing them in a way that benefits you? You see, figure drawing and portrait studies are commonly known methods of study. But I've seen people do both of them for months at a time and not get any better. They're being asked to draw an extremely complicated form without understanding the smaller shapes and forms that make it up. This just leads to repetition of bad habits for some people. And the same thing happens when some of us draw from reference. We try to draw what we see instead of understanding what is there, and we end up with a drawing that just looks like schlop. A whole lot of schlop. Asking our hands to translate what our eyes are seeing can be difficult, so breaking it down into shapes both our hands and eyes understand is a much faster way of improving, at least for me. Check this out. In December of 2020, I decided I wanted to get good at drawing faces, amongst other things. So as usual, I sat down with an overwhelming desire for improvement and began to study some Pinterest portraits. After an hour or two of repeated failure, I came out with a mess that made me question ever drawing again. I gave up on my studies for the time being, and don't think I drew anything for a while. I had video games after all. But now, less than a year later, I am able to draw heads and faces with a much greater understanding of the shapes and forms that make them up, even without reference, or even a symmetry tool. Now I still have a long way to go, but thanks to just a few exercises done over the course of like 2 weeks, I was able to level up and even transcend my older self. Here's what I did. I went back to the older face studies I did and analyzed them to see where I went wrong. What I discovered was I was unable to render the forms that made up the face, and I didn't understand the proportions of the skull, basically everything that made up a portrait drawing. So most of my time was spent drawing lines, shapes, and forms, for several days in fact. Just the most boring stuff, but I understood how much it would benefit me if I could master it. But of course, I didn't. But I was definitely much better at drawing spheres, so I thought it was time to draw some skulls. And one of the things I learned was that the skull was not in the shape of a sphere. You see, in order to get a more accurate skull, I had to break the constraints of a circle and even carve into it. It may be a simple discovery, but it's something I can use anytime I draw a head, and it helps with making more diverse head shapes. Now, my skulls were not exact copies of the references. My goal was to simply understand the forms and how they interact with each other. To see the things that were consistent and the things that often changed. I knew that if I stressed myself out about getting the drawing exactly as it was in the photo, I would take too long and ultimately use up more energy than needed. But that doesn't mean ignoring the image or creating something abstract. I tried to be as accurate as I could in how the forms looked, if that makes sense. But anyway, at this point in my long study marathon, I was getting bored and tired of doing studies in general. But I needed to tackle something that I've been avoiding for a while now, and that was the planes of the face. I spent the last of my study energy on some rough sketches to help me understand this thing. And as you can see, I didn't finish. But when I tell you this was one of the most beneficial studies I've ever done in my life, I mean it. Without understanding these planes, I wouldn't be able to draw the face at all. When combined with what I learned from the other 2 studies I did, I'm able to use reference with ease. Sometimes. I still have more studies to do, and I use this method every time in order to level up my skill. Using forms in order to understand anything is a lot easier than attacking a subject from scratch, and it's the perfect first step to learn drawing, even if you're a beginner. At the end of the day, it's up to you to decide how you're going to approach your studies. And it's not always about how much you do, but about how much you need to do in order to understand what you're doing. And from one student to another, this is what works for me. And I've never improved faster than when I'm doing studies. But of course, don't forget, once you finish a study, be sure to practice what you've learned from it in order to really make it stick. I hope this video was helpful to at least one of you out there. If not, let me know in the comments what could be done better. And if you know of other ways we can level up our art skill, let us know that as well. I believe we are all capable of reaching greatness, so let's work hard and get better together. If you are having trouble figuring out how to study things, here are a few sources I use to help me study better. Oh, and one more thing. Welcome to Edenwick.